Reclaim is a podcast for women, by women, on conversations that matter, with your host, Thais Sky. Together, we will explore the questions of what does it look like to reclaim our sovereignty, our worthiness, our voices as women in this messy world. No topics are barred as we offer roundtable discussions on life, spirituality, politics, and what it means to be a woman in the modern age. Let's do this. Hello, Reclaimers. Thais Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast, episode number 9. This week, I have the pleasure of introducing to you Amy Walsh. Amy is a storyteller, a visual storyteller, and her work has been so instrumental in my understanding of how to use images and creativity and imagination in a way that can really, really support my life and my business. So we're going to talk about creativity. We're going to talk about imagination and daydreaming. We're going to talk about embodiment. And I'm going to introduce you to her in just a second. But first, let's talk about something. This week is Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving has always been one of my absolute favorite holidays. I was not brought up in America. By that, I mean I was not born here. I moved to the United States when I was 7, so we don't celebrate Thanksgiving in Brazil. So I didn't always love Thanksgiving, and when you're little, your Thanksgiving is kind of tedious with the grown-ups or whatever. But as I've grown older, I've really fell in love with the communal aspect of Thanksgiving, the coming together and celebrating and eating and having that feast, that momentary abundance of food, and really feeling into family and being in a state of gratitude, right? Gotta love the gratitude. But as this year has unfolded and my understanding of my place amongst things as a white American has unfolded, I've come to understand that the narrative that I was told from a very young age, in school about Thanksgiving is actually kind of propaganda-like. It's actually not very, very accurate. So I was taught, right, that the pilgrims from Europe came to the United States and they got sick. They didn't know how to make food, and the climate was very different than where they came from, and they didn't understand, how to navigate the land. And so these kind Native Americans decided to give the pilgrims food and to support them. And there was this big feast and celebration of this communal of the indigenous tribes and the pilgrims, and everything's happily ever after. Now, in your education, you probably were also taught, right, that eventually we betrayed the indigenous peoples and we, kicked them out of their lands, and there were the Trail of Tears and very serious consequences and behaviors that were applied towards indigenous people. But I think what we don't really understand, or what we really weren't taught, was that Native Americans did not ever happily relinquish land for us. That wasn't the exchange. It was always an exchange of, I want to exploit this land. I want to take this, and I don't see you as human. I don't see you as ownership of this land, so I'm just going to take it. So when I started to do some research into where this narrative came from, it's very clear that it's only 100 or so years old, this idyllic conversation between the pilgrims and the Indians and the sharing of the celebratory meal. And it came after the First World War. And the mass production of that story is in part because of the textbooks of public schools. And so it works. It works because now the majority of us don't actually know what happened. And so this is what's so crazy, is that when you start really looking at history and checking the facts, you realize that so much of what we know about our place in the world, in this country, is actually a lot of propaganda, which is really, really heartbreaking. I guess heartbreaking only to people who actually believed that the government was for you, which is me as a white woman. So for many people, this is of absolute no surprise. Anyway, so let's talk about what really happened that first Thanksgiving. It was in 1637. On that day, Massachusetts colony governor John Winthrop proclaimed such a Thanksgiving to celebrate the safe return of a band of heavily armed hunters, all colonial volunteers. They had just returned from their journey to what is known as Mystic, Connecticut, where they massacred 700 Indians. So they massacred 700 Indians. They came back. The governor of Massachusetts colony wanted to celebrate it as a day of giving thanks. Thanksgiving. I have linked in the show notes for you a few articles on the history of the real Thanksgiving in case this is all new to you and you want to understand even more how all of this came about. What I've been navigating is how do you, on one hand, honor and celebrate a holiday that is so meaningful to you, that means so many things beyond what this culture has made Thanksgiving to be, while on the other hand, knowing its origins and knowing that the lies that we've been told. And how do you are you okay with having this holiday be about football and the beginning of the Christmas holidays and the Macy's Day Parade and all this stuff that is so American that we have so much pride in, while holding this knowledge that it came about through the slaughter of millions of indigenous peoples? That's what I've been thinking about, is being able to hold both. And it's understandable why a lot of people don't choose to celebrate Thanksgiving. And I'm not sure what the answer is. I mean, so much of Thanksgiving and Christmas and the holiday seasons is capitalistic, and that only fuels the engine that drives the genocide that occurred hundreds of years ago. So do we just ignore Thanksgiving altogether? Do we spend time honoring indigenous peoples? Do we look at how we can decolonize ourselves? Do we look at how we can uplift the voices of indigenous peoples? You know, this is all something that you're going to have to sit with and you're going to have to decide. And it can be different for all of us. But I think what I'm saying and what the invitation here is, do not be ignorant. You are no longer allowed to be ignorant because you now know the facts. So now that you know what you know, what can you do to make sure that your Thanksgiving is not laden with the energy of ignorance? Maybe if you're listening to this, you can bring a sense of gratitude towards the land that is not yours, that you're currently still sitting on the kitchen, the kitchen table, the Thanksgiving table on. Maybe you can spend some time honoring what happened and honoring that we are all so deeply interconnected. And even if you're an immigrant, even if you're like me and you didn't even, come to this country with these knowledge, you know that you're reaping the benefits out of a system that exploits indigenous, that exploits Black people, that exploits immigrants, Muslims, etc. All right. So let's take a moment, take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Let's shift gears a little bit. Maybe need to pause this podcast and place a hand on your heart and just be with that heartbreak, because it is within our bodies, yeah? And then when you're ready, let's get into a really divinely beautiful conversation with visual storyteller Amy Walsh. This is her bio. Amy is an artist, visual storytelling specialist, and sculptural world maker. She helps business builders uncover the visual story of their work and use it to communicate their most important ideas. The bio may be short, but her knowledge and competency and brilliance is so deep, so deep. I am not sure how I met Amy. I think it was just through our community, our mutual friends, but I connected with her and she really made me think. The visuals that she shares of herself in the community are unusual and different. And, you cannot deny that she is brilliant at visual storytelling. And I remember seeing her photo, which you can check out her photos on the show notes. Her photos made me think. And I love that. Because that's the point, huh? As we're telling our stories, don't we want people to be pausing and thinking and listening to us? And that's what she did for me. And so I'm really, really excited to be featuring her on the podcast this week. And as you're listening, I would love for you to be thinking about, what is your relationship with creativity? What is your relationship with your body and creativity? And are you running your life and business at the pace of your body? Hello, Amy Walsh. You have one of those names where you just have to do first and last name. You know what I mean? You can't just do Amy. So, hi, Amy Walsh.
One syllable thing. You have that too, Thais Sky.
Yeah. So welcome to Reclaim. How are you doing?
I am doing really well. I'm happy to be having this conversation with you. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm a long time admirer. Well, maybe not long time because I haven't known you a long time, but in the short time I have known you, I have been a huge admirer of your work and your unique process and your unique experience and vision and the way that you reflect that in your business. It's divine. And I'm so excited for the listeners to get just a little whiff of Amy-ness in their lives.
Thank you. I'll try to blow some Amy whiff in that direction.
Okay. So one of the things that I love about your work in the world is your conversation on creativity and imagination. And the word imagination, I feel like, is not used at all. It's like becoming like a dead word. Like, at least in my small, narrow scope of the world, I'm missing that conversation. There's a lot of conversation about the feminine and creativity and your womb and intuition. People can't see me, but I'm like wiggling my body, right? There's a lot of those conversations. But the idea of imagination, even daydreaming, I feel like is becoming a lost art. And I would love for you to share a little bit of your thoughts around imagination and creativity and what has been coming up for you as you've been reclaiming those things in your life.
Yeah, actually, the thing that pops into my mind as you were talking is comes from a little bit of a different place, but it just popped up. So I'll say it and then kind of get back to the more general thing, which was, it's more a question that just popped up to me around, people are talking about intuition and what are some of the other words you said, like all the things that we're talking, like reclaiming all of the parts of us that aren't so brain centered.
Yes.
And in the divine feminine and, just kind of contradicting that big patriarchal capitalist thing about that it's all about the brain. But I think there's this other side of it for women or people targeted by sexism that we also, on some level, don't consider ourselves geniuses or brilliant, or that, it's like who gets to have the big imaginations in the society? Like, who do we think of as the visionary geniuses? And on some level, I think, I've worked with so many women, and I think this is true for all different kinds of people with any kind of marginalized identity. There's some place where we don't see our consciousness as like completely whole or completely 100%, So I think, when I think of imagination, I think the typical way of thinking about that is that it has something to do with your brain and your mind and your ability to conceive of new things, to bring things into being that you've never seen or heard about before, that couldn't exist within the laws of physics that are, just this limitless realm, right? And first of all, of course, that's not just your mind doing that. It's your body. It's the whole ecosystem you're in. It's your relationships. It comes from sources or a source much bigger than just your brain. But it's also something we do with our brains, and that to know that we have infinite imaginative power is something that not a lot of us walk around feeling confident about.
Truth.
So that's what popped up when you were saying that. I was thinking, well, why is it we don't talk about imagination that much?
Yeah.
It must be a little bit of a sore spot.
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe, and also we push away so much from the intellect and patriarchy in our attempts to reclaim our womanness, whatever that looks like, that we simultaneously also push away the idea of being a visionary or being imaginative. And I think we do need both. I think both are important. And I've read research lately that says that daydreaming, people are doing it less and less, but science is showing that spending more time daydreaming is extremely beneficial to our well-being. And I think that's such a shame that we're losing that art, or maybe not losing it, but we're, not prioritizing it as much as we used to.
Yeah, I think a lot of our idle time or daydreaming time or time just spent sitting with ourselves in our minds and our imagination is being replaced by social media time and screen time. Like it's becoming less and less comfortable to just be with ourselves in the present moment and our experience of the world. I don't know, maybe that was always hard, but with these addictive screens all around us, it's really easy to never have to be in that place with yourself. And, many of my favorite writers on creativity and artists writing about creativity say that the very best work they do comes out of idleness.
Yes.
Without idleness, creativity cannot find its place, So I think there's just so many other sources for our true creative work that don't reside in the sort of linear getting stuff done or consuming stuff from the outside spaces that we're in so much of the time. Very relevant for all of us who are running businesses and being leaders. There's always a to-do list a mile long. And there are always things to check on.
Yes.
On our screens. I struggle with that a lot. I have to have very firm policies with myself about the screen time and very firm policies to slow down and have that idle time.
Yeah. Yeah. I find myself checking my phone at in bed at nighttime. And
Me too.
it also studies talking about science, shows that light in your face and that, the processing required to be reading actually prevents us from producing the melatonin and producing the elements of sleep. And so we're sleep deprived. We're walking around like zombies, constantly plugged into the matrix. It's little wonder that we have a harder time connecting with creativity, which is something that really is very elusive and has to have space for it.
Yeah, and at bedtime too, you're crossing that threshold into dream, which is such a major place that we nourish and replenish our creative and imaginative centers.
Yeah.
And, what would it be like if we all treated that threshold as the sacred doorway we were going through and got really slow and really quiet? And I've experimented. It's harder now that I have a child and, there's other people in the house with other agendas. But I've experimented in the past with just letting the house go dark as the sky goes dark and just being in the dark for several hours before I go to sleep. And those were always amazing sleeps and beautiful dreams.
Interesting. Wow. I never thought of it that way. I love that. Yeah. Maybe I can get my partner to do it with me.
Try it out.
Well, part of your work, your entire work lies on creativity. I mean, everything about who you are and what you do in your business is very creative and it's so wonderful. And I want to talk about that juxtaposition, or maybe not, that's not the right word, but what's the word I'm looking for? The polarity between, the creativity and what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I think that there's a couple things going on. One is that we don't spend as much time in explicitly open-ended creative processes as we could or maybe should. But another is that we, what's the word? We kind of push aside our own acknowledgement of how creative we are. So many of us, as we're building our businesses or doing our work, are engaged in creative processes more of the time than we think we are. So we're creating programs, and we're doing copywriting, and we're, figuring out how to reach out to people, and we're engaged in really interesting conversations. And, we're doing activities throughout the day, many of which are linked to kind of bigger creative processes within us. But since we haven't been trained to kind of appreciate or acknowledge creative processes in our lives, we think we're not being creative.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I work with people on often, is just reflecting back to them how much creativity is already in operation. And that's so important, because that can become the basis for leaping into other, maybe less routine ways of being creative. So I think that's really important. And then there are those creative processes that we can tell are explicitly, a creative process that feels different, that draws on a different part of our consciousness, that puts us in a different relationship to kind of time and activity. And those are really important to integrate into our businesses too. They actually make us so much better at everything we do, more grounded, more connected. So if you take making social media images as an example, that's something that most of us have to do at least some of the time.
Yeah.
Most of us feel like we should do it better, or we should do it more. We know that people pay more attention to what we do when there's great images, and we have all kinds of questions about how to do those images or what they should be. And our everyday linear list making, get things done by deadline brain goes looking for the most literal, best solution we could come up with within a short period of time, and misses the opportunity to engage in a deeper process of finding our voice as visual creators, as visual communicators. And that is more akin to writing poetry or something in a visual sense. It's about gathering a lot of raw material and trying a lot of different things and slowly letting something emerge and evolve, doing lots and lots of things that you will never use, recognizing that there's no waste in the creative process. So maybe you'll make 100 images and only use 3, but that other 97 was such a rich part of the process of finding those images. If that task is supported by a bigger creative conversation in your world and in your business, you are then able to start to develop social media images that are not only illustrating what you're talking about, but they're delivered with your voice.
Yeah.
And people can feel that. People can really respond to that. That's when you start to look different than everybody else out there. And then having that creative process as part of your business, it's like having, the poet Mary Oliver calls it regular appointments with your soul. It's having a place in your work life where you nourish the part of your brain that just wants to play and imagine and be in dialogue with mystery. And that can really help you be so much more courageous and flexible as a thinker and doer in all the different parts of your business. It becomes a kind of creative process that you could translate to all different kinds of activities, and help you stay off your phone.
Well, and just something that you said right there, I want to take a pause and really accent it, is this idea that our images are actually it's a visual voice. I don't think that many of us think of the images that we use online in our businesses as representation of our voice. And so when I go on, let's say, my Instagram back in the day, and it's all whitewashed and it's all basic overlays and it's all, very contrasty or whatever, that's saying something.
Yeah.
And that's saying something about who I am. That's saying something about my beliefs. That's saying, and I want to say that out loud because I don't think that many of us really connect that. But what I am saying is something. And so we get to make our society, we get to make our impact based simply on our visual representation of our work. And that's what I see you do, and I see you question, and I see you play with. And you made me think so much about this, because before I really got into your work, I didn't even really think about it, So that's what I so appreciate about what you do. And what you're saying is you've got a responsibility for the images that you're creating, because that is saying something. So what are you fucking saying?
Yes. Yes. And what is your voice while you're saying it?
Yeah.
How are you showing up in the making and distributing of these images? Absolutely. You get it. You get me. It's nice to hear you reflect back like that. Yeah. I mean, I think that you also just reminded me of the conversation about imagination. Like we create culture. Culture is not something that happens to us. There's definitely like a corporate mass dominant culture that tries to get us to consume it as much as possible, because we're dangerous when we realize that we are the cultural producers. And the thing about imagination that I always come back to is that everything destructive that human beings have wrought come from our imaginations. Like racism is a figment of the white colonial imagination. None of these things have a basis in anything but our ability to create stories, and to see things, in a way that comes out of our imagination, and everything unbelievably, shockingly beautiful and incredible that we've done and invented and, created comes out of our imagination as well. So we create the world, and we can recreate the world all the time. And that's why imagination is so important. And yes, on the microcosmic level in our businesses, the images that we put out have a ripple effect all the way across culture. And I think that how we tend to think about it, particularly in the business world, it's a little different in the art world and like different parts of the culture. But in the business world, we tend to think of it as that it's enough to make images that are beautiful, that are professional, that position ourselves the right way, that stimulate in us like desires or longings or things that we appreciate. But it's all very externally focused. And I think that's not enough. It's sometimes will do the job to get you some clients, but it doesn't actually position you where you want to be positioned, which is in the very unique place where your voice speaking your truth is a radical, radical thing. And that's a desire that I see is very common among spiritual and socially conscious and culturally conscious entrepreneurs, is that our truth and our voice can make a big difference in the world. And so the visual world is a language that is incredibly powerful in that way.
Well, I'm just thinking about my visuals before I started to understand what you're saying. And they were just basically like everybody else's visuals, very like lifestyle-y, and a sense of, I never got photos in Paris because of financial means, but if I had the financial means, you fucking know, Amy, that I would have been
Eiffel Tower.
in front of the fucking Eiffel Tower with my little umbrella, like in my skirt, like that would have been me. And so I guess I'm thankful for my financial limitations at that time for preventing me from investing in my business in that way. But that was what I believed I had to do to position my voice in a certain way. And now I'm seeing that if we're following what everybody else is doing, how much of our own unique elements and our uniqueness can come out. How much culture are we influencing if our business looks like everybody else's business?
Right. Exactly. And, I just want to throw in here for you and for anyone else who's listening who resonates with you. And I certainly resonate with you, not so much around the images, because I've been a visual artist my whole life and I've gotten a lot of help around that. But
you're just jealous of my Eiffel Tower, Amy. That's what it is.
I am. But I am in almost every other area of my business. I have gone through these cycles of trying to do it like everyone else is doing it, because that's also this beautiful way that we learn.
Yeah,
we learn through mimicry. And, you know, children learn by mimicking everyone around them over and over and over. It's such a beautiful way to learn. And, you know, in art school, undergrad, like I learned to paint by copying the great master painters that I wanted to copy. And so I think this is important too, when it, you know, all the questions about like intellectual property and appropriation and things like that come up, particularly around intellectual property. To some degree, we're all just kind of sharing and mimicking each other while we learn. And that's great. That's great. And it helps you build some skills. It helps you start to learn some things about your aesthetic. There's still a lot in there that's you. But
don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and don't judge it, you know. Totally. But when you want to expand it, one really good thing to do is look outside the industry for inspiration. So I make my clients look at art books and photography books and design books and science books and astronomy, but like just go to the library, because still like a very tiny percentage of all the imagery that human beings have made is even on the internet, you know, and the visual culture of the digital entrepreneur spaces is very narrow. So if you're going to be sponging and harvesting and mimicking and kind of learning through others, let that bank of inspiration be big. You know, like pull yourself into visual worlds that you didn't know were there, absorb, you know. And that's, I realized there's a little bit of a crossover between that and starting to just kind of appropriate from other cultures and things like that. That's kind of not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just like dive into the incredible rich wealth of visual imagery that's there.
I did something radical yesterday. At this point in this recording, it may have been months from now. I don't know when this will be released, but it was yesterday in this time. I unfollowed everyone on Instagram.
Wow.
So if you go to my Instagram, I'm Beyonce status. I've unfollowed everybody. And, you know, everybody that I was following and that I engage, I'm connected with on Facebook. So I already get to be with them. So I'm not unfollowing because I don't care about people, right? It's not about that. I'm already connected to them, but because I was getting so inundated with everyone else's images and everything that everyone else is doing, that it becomes hard to find your own voice. It becomes hard to find your own visual. And so I love what you're sharing, which is to go outside of the industry, go outside of the same thing that you're seeing over and over and over again, to inform your thinking and inform your imagination, rather than just a small pool of entrepreneurship that is the foundation of most people's Instagram following.
Yes. There's a beautiful art library here. I live in Providence, Rhode Island. So the Rhode Island School of Design has this incredible art library. It's like the size of some normal city library, but it's all art books basically.
Wow.
And architecture and photography and things. And there's this thing that happens when I start, you know, I'll go up and down, you know, 10 different stacks, 10 different aisles, and just pick books at random, and then go back to a table and start looking. And it's like you're dreaming, you know, it's just like entering these visual spaces that are just so unknown to you and so mysterious. And then seeing what happens when you move from one image in one book to another image in another book. And it's such food for the imagination, you know, and it always gives me so many ideas, you know, so many starting points for things that I could do or things that I could do for my clients or whatever. I really recommend it.
That sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
So it's basically not taking your photos for granted, not taking your images for granted just because it's another thing that you've got to do is to post on Instagram, but to start to really question the influence that you're making and whether or not it's a real representation of your voice and your power.
Yes. And it's something, you know, some people say, I'm already so busy in my business. Like there's no way I'm going to integrate like an hour a day of a creative process and spend all this time making my own images, et cetera, et cetera. And I get that. And not everyone can or wants to spend that much time on images, but it's possible to do just enough that you start to really be able to visualize, like you start to be able to hold the visual story of your business enough so that when you hire a photographer or hire a designer or hire an artist to work with you, you can listen for the people who can think this way with you. Listen for the people who know, and there are plenty, but there's also plenty who aren't like this. Listen for the people who understand that a brand is a voice and that there's more to it than
the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah. I think so many of exactly. I think so many of us, it's like enough just to imagine that we could fit in, and so that's a milestone when we realize that we fit in, that we actually have what it takes to be peers amongst all the people around us. But then that place where we're ready to step out and really be ourselves beyond the kind of mimicry piece. You want to find people in the branding and creative disciplines to help you, that really help you find your voice there and can help you understand how to translate what's at the heart of what you do into visual language, and not just make a bunch of images for you and leave them there.
Yeah.
So that 6 months later you can say, these don't quite fit anymore and I don't really know why, and I don't know what to do next.
Right.
You don't want to keep reinventing the wheel. You want it to be something you can evolve with.
Right. So as we're talking about imagination and creativity, I would love to bring in the thread of something that you mentioned before we got on the podcast, which is about embodiment and your body and finding that space for that in your business. And I'm curious how those all come together for you.
Yeah. You'd asked me what I was reclaiming, and I said, it started with living my life and running my business at the pace of my body. And my body really forced this issue a couple of years ago because I got really, really sick with multiple autoimmune diseases. And I was bedridden. This is why I went into my own business. Before that, I was the executive director, a part-time, I put in quotes, executive director of an environmental nonprofit. And I was teaching art at 2 different universities as a part-time instructor and making my own work. And I'm a mother of a young child. So I was like completely burnt out and got really sick. And the illness became the beginning of a whole lot of epiphanies for me about the ways that that I was willing to exploit my own physical form in the service of the greater good that was at hand, even when that greater good was my vision or my inspiration or my imagination. So in many ways, I was a typical artist for many years who would work deep into the night and forgo sleep and food. An idea would take over my being, and I would be sleepless for nights and nights writing. This kind of like feverish artist archetype was me. Not just about art, but whatever I was excited about. My body just kind of had to come along. And I've had to really, really change that and ask myself every day, what does it mean today to run this business and to relate to my creativity and my art at the pace of my body, to recognize that my body is the source of all of the creativity, imagination, energy. And my body is also the conduit of the bigger source of creativity and imagination and energy, and that it's absolutely has to come first at every moment. And that's not about self-care as another thing on the list to do right, or being a good girl in this way or that way. It's really about like getting to be fully alive and joyous and being fully alive. So I think about that a lot. It very much started with my body and I said, if I'm going to start a business, it has to be a business that makes me healthier at the end of every week.
Wow.
More full at
That's
the
a bold statement. I'm not sure many entrepreneurs can honestly say that their business makes them better in their body.
Yeah, like at the end of the week, are you more nourished or are you more depleted because of the work that you've done and how you've done it?
I can't with that question right now. That is such a beautiful I don't even want to think about the answer to that question because I have a feeling I know.
Yes. And let me just report.
Damn it,
I'm 2 years into this and I'm still a bit more depleted than nourished at the end of every week. But I'm getting there.
Good question. That is such a good question.
Yes.
Because isn't the whole fucking reason that we're doing this? Like, isn't like we're choosing. We're all all of us entrepreneurs are choosing to be entrepreneurs. Some of us feels like it's less of a choice, right? Like you maybe it felt like a little less of a choice and more of like, I need to do this, but still you could have slugged.
There's a lot of choice in it.
Yeah. And so why are we feeling so depleted and not nourished in this work?
I mean, I think we really internalize the ethos of exploitation that is the time that we're living in human communities. You know, we internalize. When I was, you know, really in the thick of it with the illness, the language I found for it was, I am not a natural resource to be fracked.
Yes.
My body is not here to be extracted from.
That image, because you use the word fracking, which is and it is the most exploitive way that we take oil. There's other ways, other means, but you're using a word that's extremely exploitive and creates extreme repercussions on Earth.
Yes. When you think about like, what are the extremes that we will go to extract an energy source from the body of the Great Mother, you know? Well, I went through some pretty big extremes to extract energy from my body before I got sick.
Yeah.
And it was just normal because that's the culture we live in.
Yes.
You know, for everybody in all different kinds of ways. And obviously it, you know, comes down on some bodies differently and more harshly than others. But I think everyone internalizes it in some way. So
it's almost like, how can we bring that creativity, that imagination that we're pouring into our work? How can we bring it into, how can we get creative in our business so that it is not fracking? It's not taking away from a natural resource, so that then we can have the boundaries so that other people aren't extracting our natural resource from us.
Yes. So we know how to set the pace. It's totally a personal and planetary question, right?
Yeah.
And it requires imagination again. Like it requires really rewriting a story inside of us to a very ecological and interconnected and interdependent way of being and knowing that, you know, we often can't feel or access. But the body is a great way, you know, to slow down and really try to match the pace of your body actions, like to let the body lead. It can feel impossible. I mean, it can also feel impossible because of the structures that we live in. Like we don't have a choice a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It's like you got to get up and do the thing because of the oppressive structures you live in. There's no escape from it.
Yeah.
But that internal shift of even recognizing that it's a thing, that it's important, can just start to ripple out into your life in so many amazing ways. You know, days I totally exploit my body. I'll just say it. But you know, your actions can follow your philosophical shift. So that's what I'm working on.
I interviewed Randy and Mary Beth, and Mary Beth said that concept of earning a living, and why do we live in a space where we have to earn a life? And that's still been sitting with me, because language represents our culture. The language that we use says a lot about the culture that we live in. And so that is the culture that we live in, that we have to earn a living.
Yep.
And how does that support our not economic system, but our ecosystem, our body, our wellness, if we have to earn the life that we live?
Right. That's what we do to, you know, the animals and the plants and the minerals and the oil. We say you're only valuable in as much as you work for us.
Yes.
And we got to stop that with ourselves. I actually was just working with a client this morning, and we spent, you know, a good half of the call just talking about her relationship to her to-do list and our relationships to our to-do lists, which it's good to have them because it helps us structure and organize our tasks, right?
Yeah.
But the to-do list becomes this reprimand sitting on our desk, telling us it's not enough, it's not fast enough, it's not done yet, you know, pressuring us. And that has nothing to do with the list, right?
Yes.
It has everything to do with us feeling like we're fighting against time to earn this living, as if we weren't enough, and as if today wasn't the perfect day just as it is. And you know. And I find myself saying to her, you know, you have to build your business at the pace of your body, and anything faster than that doesn't work. And thinking to myself, geez, I got to remember to keep doing that.
Yeah. I think that's so wise. We have to build our business at the pace of our body, or else it's not going to work.
It's not going to work for us, and we're not going to actually understand what it takes to.
And we're not going to break the system.
Exactly. To create the paradigm shift.
Exactly.
That we need.
Exactly.
Keep exploiting the land and
exactly.
keep exploiting other people. Yep.
And so on the flip side, we have to stop fucking selling that.
Exactly.
Especially through our images.
Yes.
Constantly using images of us being vital and happy on the Eiffel Tower is violent.
Yes.
Because it is
thin and wealthy and white and sexy and all these things.
It's perpetuating a violence against our own body.
Yes.
I'm getting like chills and tears just thinking about this. I don't know why I'm tearing up about this, but I just, we've got to stop this, Amy.
Yeah.
We've got to all join on the Amy train. And
there's a lot of us.
There is. But you're my train. You're my train at the moment. And that exploit you.
This is the thing. We are a giant train depot with lots and lots of trains going in different directions. Like, think about all your podcast guests.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Like, the communities that, you know, it's funny. I had such an attitude about the business community when I started my business because I'd never really been in it. I'd always been in nonprofit and visual arts and community arts and all these things that are supposedly morally superior to the business world. And I have met the most brilliant, caring, revolutionary people that I've known in my life in these business spaces, like just really creative, courageous starter uppers. And so much good thinking. I feel like we're attacking this planet. Well, I shouldn't say attacking. That's part of the language thing, right? But we're now I'm really looking at my language. It's not working either. But we're approaching this planetary shift from 1,000 angles.
Yes, we are.
It's really beautiful.
It's a really awesome community space. And the conversations that the guests of my podcast are just a small percentage of the community that we are in. And it's really beautiful.
It is. And it's a really interesting place to be because we're in business. So as entrepreneurs, we are very much in the center of a capitalist structure.
Yes, we are.
A capitalist economy. And so we're talking about marketing, and how do you market in a system where marketing is used to oppress people
and manipulate and exploit?
And so we're in the middle of this interesting thing that everyone's in, really, which is like, how do you live into the vision of the world you're creating while learning to survive and thrive within the one that already exists? And I think all the answers are in those two questions.
Yeah. And I think the underlying kind of paradigm or belief that the means justify the ends, right, is the foundation of business as it's been operating for a long time. Like, well, we're doing good in the world, so it doesn't matter how we got there. The amount of transparency that's starting to happen is changing that conversation, where now the means does not justify the ends. If you're exploiting people and abusing people, and then you're saying that you're a green company, you know, that's not going to work anymore. And it starts with these types of conversations.
Yeah. The how is the point.
Yes, exactly.
How is the whole point.
So any final thoughts that you want to share on creativity, imagination, embodying the body, reclamation?
One last thing I wanted to say, because I was conscious as we were talking about all the stuff about finding your visual language in your business, that people could be listening to this and thinking, yes, but how? How exactly? And one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately and having conversations with people a lot about lately, well, it's been longer than lately, it's really been since I started this business, is to remind women, or, you know, women identified people in general, anyone targeted by sexism in the larger society, is when it comes to visual images, we are still obviously living in a world where women are, and femaleness and femininity is so wrapped up in appearance.
Yes.
So wrapped up in appearance. We are a brand. We are packaged.
Yes.
And very differently than the setup for men in photographs, and I want you to think about like images you've seen of portraits of, quote, great men in Time magazine and Life magazine, and how different those look than images, the successful woman archetype imagery.
Yes.
For women in the visual world, it's very much about appearances.
Yes.
And it's tricky for us because an image is visual. Like, of course, it's about appearances, right? But one thing that I've been saying to my clients and to the people in my community is, what if the images you were making about you and your business were about the genius of your work, or about the experience, or about the imagination, or about your heart and mind, just as much, if not more, than anything that has to do with appearances?
Yeah.
What if all of the appearance, the kind of like visual stuff in your imagery were telling that kind of a story? What if in your next photo shoot, you were really embodying and projecting your mastery and your brilliance, and your listening, and, whatever it is that really makes you you, more than you were paying attention to how your hair was looking and the position of your body? And how do the photographs look different?
Yeah.
What if your desktop image, kind of flat lay image, wasn't about the appearance of a workday, but was this sort of magical theater space where we could really see how your mind works? Maybe there's diagrams and doodles and notes, and maybe there's objects that together tell some kind of a story, whereas we get pulled towards the appearance of like it looking sort of domestically perfect and clean and wealthy and, those lifestyle things. So I think that's just like, that's a starting point. It's almost like approaching the same kind of images from a slightly different place in the room.
Yeah. I love that. I think that gives people a lot to think about. And for those of you that are listening that want some visual support on this, go find Amy Walsh. Like, please. Like, if you know anything about anything, go find Amy's work and you'll see exactly what she's talking about. And your images are so unique, Amy.
Thank you.
The visual representation that you create is so, it catches the eye and it makes you think and it makes you want to lean in and get closer. And that's what we're all wanting. We're all wanting people to, in their scrolling madness of Instagram or Facebook, to see the image that you post and be like, wait, what? Like, what is here?
Yes.
And there's something very intentional about this photo. I need to lean into it. You do that very well.
We all can do that. We can all do that with our images. And how beautiful will our Facebook feeds look when we're all doing that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Amy, for sharing your thoughts with us today. This has been a really potent conversation, and I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks for all these incredible questions. I love talking to you and having this conversation.
Yay!
Appreciate it so much. Yay!
Amy and I had a lot of thoughts around creativity, visual storytelling, and embodiment, and now we want to hear yours. Come hang out with us on Instagram and Facebook. You can find Amy on Facebook at facebook.com/Amy Walsh Coaching, and you can find her on Instagram at instagram.com/Tactical Imagination. And you can find me at I am Thais Sky. And if you want to learn more about Amy's work, go to www.amywalsh.net. And as always, you can come learn more about me and my work at www.thaissky.com. See you next week.